All right, huge night for the Florida Tennis Podcast. We have the executive editor of tennisplayer.net, tennis historian, tennis journalist Joel Drucker. Joel, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing great. It's a beautiful evening here in California. Played a little tennis earlier today, working on some stories and stuff. Just going great.
Well, that is awesome. So this is Adam Ross with the Florida Tennis Podcast, and we are so excited to be here. Now, anybody who knows tennis should know Joel Drucker, but I will, and this is the embarrassing part usually for the guests because I got to do a little bit of your background, Joel. So I will let people know you are a prominent tennis journalist, a historian. You've authored numerous articles on the sport for a lot of magazines, publications. You've worked with the Tennis Channel. You've covered the majors. You've covered significant tournaments. You've written for Inside Tennis and Racket Magazine. And I love this. In 2016, you're named the historian at large. We're going to talk a little bit about this at the International Tennis Hall of Fame. Pretty amazing. You've done a lot of research. I love the Tennis Worthy podcast with Patrick McEnroe, and I know you're intricately involved in that. And those are just wonderful. I heard one recently with Charlie Pasarell. We're going to talk a little bit about Charlie. You're the author of, by the way, this incredible book. All right, Jimmy Connors saved my life. We're going to talk a bit about this. Fascinating. I recommend this to everyone who's within eyeshot and earshot of this podcast. Um, you do have a book coming up after this with a titled "Serving First," I believe, due out in spring of 26. And I think
Serving
look at
first, it's
look
the
at this.
autobiography of Charlie Pasarell that he and I have spent a couple of years working on.
Love it. Dreams realized and lessons learned from family, friends, and life in tennis. And I'm so glad you're doing this book. I've met him. I met him at a USTA meeting. He is one of the nicest guys, a great player. I think I asked him, unfortunately, about the Pancho Gonzalez match. I mean, he must be tired of talking about that one. We'll get
No,
into
he's
it.
probably told it. He's probably told the story of it about 500 times, but he knows that it was an incredible effort on the biggest stage of tennis versus one of the all-time greatest players, and he knows that he threw himself into the battle and left every drop of blood on the court, and he doesn't mind talking about that. And as you can imagine, we spoke about that at length, and there's a lot of backstory to Charlie's relationship with Pancho Gonzalez, so it's great. You know, it's interesting. I wrote one book about a guy with a great return, and another book, as you can tell, this. How's that for a service motion, Matt? Adam, I'm sorry. Is
No,
that a service match? Is that a hip turn? Is
it
that a
is.
service motion? Is that a ball ready to be rocketed into the court at some triple digit speed that I know I can't reach? I can't speak to your game, but that's
It's
Charlie.
beautiful. And now I'm glad you mentioned Matt because that is a good segue. Matt Pressman, the editor and publisher of Florida Tennis. I may be wearing the logo on my hat, on my shirt behind me. Maybe I'm over logoed, but you're involved in a venture called tennisplayer.net. This is part of my introduction of you. And um, can you talk? We'll get into it a little bit later, but that is certainly something you've worked on with Matt, and I know you're proud of, and it's so. Can you talk? Let's just start off right there. Can you talk a little bit about tennisplayer.net?
It's a visionary instructional publication started more than 20 years ago by the late John Yandell. John Yandell was a visionary pioneer in using video research to really break down how the game is learned and taught and how strokes really work. I knew John. We both lived in the San Francisco Bay Area. I wrote some things for him, and John really looked at what does a stroke really mean? What is topspin really about? What is RPMs? John did a lot of, he had studies funded by NASA, really understood all sorts of things. Um, in the wake of John's death, I was in touch with his widow, Isabel, and his management team, and they asked me to come up with some ideas for the publication. And uh, and so I came up with some concepts that I thought were going to make it more compelling, or just build on the legacy John created and just do that even more. So Matt became the publisher. I'm the executive editor, and we're just grinding away. It's very exciting. It's very exciting, and we can talk more about the. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
You
Um,
don't need to apologize. There's
so we it's a
no
podcast.
apologies on the Florida Tennis Podcast.
So we are just grinding away and coming up with terrific instructional articles. In the most recent issue, it was all about the return of serve, and Tim Mayotte, former top 10 player, wrote a great story for us on that. Chris Lewitt, tremendous contributor. Victoria Belinsky, a Florida-based coach who I got to know through Matt, she wrote a great article, and all these articles are designed to help people learn, compete, and improve. That's what we're about. Learn, compete, and improve. Our readers really want to become better tennis players. And I know this is a little bit different of a shift for me from the narrative news world that I've been in quite a lot to more what they call it service journalism, very focused on news you can use, practical, useful concepts.
And I love of those names. I have to go to Tim Mayotte just a little bit because I was at the Miami Open when they celebrated with him and Butch Buchholz and Martina, and Tim winning the first Miami Open, which wasn't even played in Miami at the time. But I'm a huge Tim Mayotte fan, and I'm so glad to see he was incredibly nice when I talked with him.
They call him Gentleman Tim, and I've known him a long time, and he was a great player, seven in the world, won 12 ATP titles, beat all the great players of his day, and tremendously engaging to work with him.
Well, I'm going to segue now into just a little bit about the Australian Open. My take in getting to know you a bit before the podcast, we've talked a lot, is you watch tennis a little differently, I would say, a lot differently than the average person. A lot of it through the historical lens. So I think the final of Carlos Alcaraz and Novak Djokovic is a good jumping off point because you have two players trying to make history. You have Carlos Alcaraz obviously trying to win all four slams. The Australian Open would have been I think the fourth slam and his seventh overall. And then you have Djokovic going for 25. So you, as a historian, this has got to be break out the popcorn for this match, right?
Well, there's a lot of excitement coming into that match because either outcome is tremendously significant. I mean, it's always significant. It's funny. I was at the Australian Open in 2018 when Roger Federer sought to defend the title he won the previous year. And I was walking around the grounds before, and I was asking people who they wanted to win. Federer was going to play Marin Cilic, and they said, "Well, I want to see Federer win. It's got to be that's history." Well, if the other guy wins, that's history too. It's all going to be history. It's going to be history if the ball boy wins. Uh, but your point is great, Adam, which is something tremendous was going to happen no matter who won. Whether Novak winning his 25th, which would break a record tied with Margaret Court, though there's a lot to be discussed about. Nonetheless, he would conclusively have won more singles majors than any player ever. And then there's Alcaraz bidding to become only the ninth man to have won all four in the course of his career. So that was exciting. Now, and the fact that Djokovic had beaten him there last year, and you got the whole generational thing. Djokovic is coming off a very significant win against Sinner. So yeah, it had a lot going for it. I think the tennis started off tremendous for Novak. He was pretty much redlining, playing great tennis, and Alcaraz looked very flustered. But I think over time, youth carried out over age. I think he had just too much. The way he's built a game, the way he's built a game in the wake of being inspired by the likes of Djokovic, Nadal, and Federer. Alcaraz knew he had to build a playing style to overtake those kind of guys, and he has.
And from a historical perspective, I mean, there's the Djokovic looking at Rafa on the big screen. There was a lot to unpack, and for Djokovic to get to win another major, obviously a lot of things have to fall into place. It seemed like it was setting up that way.
Setting
You
up which
had
way?
for Djokovic. I mean, you
Yeah,
had
I thought I'm the one who lives in LA where they make movies. Where they make movies where they script these things. That's can seem to be the case sometimes. He gets some good breaks from a withdrawal of one opponent, a mid-match withdrawal of another, a significant win against Sinner. It appears that freshness will not be an issue for him, so that's good. Comfortable weather conditions, so that's good. So those things appear to be lining up, but we all know that's what happens in sports. You have to play the game to
right.
see to really make it. So that then you gotta play the guy. So not quite. I wonder also, was he looking at Nadal? Was he also looking at Ken Rosewall, who remains the oldest man to win a singles major?
That's a great point, and I guess I'll leave it at this. I had watched in person Jakub Menšik beat
Yes.
Novak at the Miami Open, and
Tiebreaker? Was that a two
it was
tiebreaker?
it was a two tiebreaker situation, and I remember thinking, well, that's going to be a rough match for him. And Menchik, is injured, and Musetti. You have those two. You have, is up and ends up retiring. Conversely, you have Alcaraz, who seems to be hurt. It's a little bit controversial. Was it cramps? And of course, I hate to just not. I mean, I got to bring this up, but how much more heartbreak can Zverev take, do you think, before it just becomes? I mean, it's kind of brutal, wouldn't you
Before it
say?
becomes what? Before it becomes what?
Virtually insurmountable. I mean, this is a player who should, by all rights, win a major. No, I mean, wouldn't you say? The match against Team.
Yeah, but there's always every era every era there's that player who's the best active player who's ever won. I'll got a name for you. I'll give you. How about Dennis Ralston? How
Okay.
about how about Tom Acker? How about Rex Hartwig? I mean, let's go. I mean, there's one, and they have moments of uh, close. There's no shoulds. Zverev, we look at those things as a little bit like Sabalenka, who lost her fourth singles major, even though she's already won four of them. And you think, well, do you look at it in the macro, or do you look at it in the particular? I watched at the end of the Zverev Alcaraz match. Really interesting. He's serving for the match. He's getting the ball in the court, but it's a little bit of I think it's a developmental mindset. There's one developmental mindset that Zverev clearly learned, which is called don't miss. Keep the ball on the court. Don't miss. Make them play. Do all this. Make them play. But you see, at a certain point, that mindset is limited. And you look at Alcaraz as a little more like he worked with a coach, and the coach's attitude, we've built weapons. Use them. Use them. And you see, how many times by now have we seen Carlos Alacaraz, only at 22, realize, I have weapons. I'm using them. I'm not going for it. I'm not going for it because I own it. It's not frivolous if you own it. Like Steph Curry. Steph Curry doesn't think don't miss. Steph Curry's got to think, yeah, I'm going to make it. And I think with Zverev, who knows? It's like, yeah, I don't know if it's insurmountable. It's just, you're right. He's had many matches by now where he seems like, wow, you just couldn't get over it. But on the other hand, it's a little bit like the Buffalo Bills. You would you rather win one Super Bowl, or would you rather lose four?
There was I guess the tournament started off with the event, the 1 point slam, you know,
Yeah.
and there was a moment, there was a particular broadcaster who didn't particularly know a lot about tennis, and he was interviewing Zverev, and he said, "How are you in the clutch?" Something along those lines, and even Zverev kind of smiled because he's obviously had a little bit of trouble
No, he
in,
definitely has.
in
He
the
was up two
clutch.
sets to love in the
Yeah,
U.S. Open final,
yeah,
2 sets to one in a Roland Garros final.
right.
This one where he was leading in the fifth set after making a great comeback. On the other hand, he made a great comeback. Yeah, but I think how it works, you just keep playing and you
Yeah.
just hope for good things. I mean, right?
And I mean to take nothing away from Zverev. I'm just a little bit stunned on at some of it was a tough break, the entire the way the situation broke out. But let's segue a little bit into I'm going to call it the resurgence of Rybakina. Even though you could say she never really left, she had a little bit of a blip. But what's your take on Rybakina over Sabalenka? This her ceiling. Where do you see her headed?
Well, I don't make predictions. I don't like the prediction part.
Okay.
However, Bacana, ever since she won Wimbledon, it's been clear what a great player is. What I like about her, I like her competitive temperament. I like the fact that her matches aren't these roller coasters. That roller coasting. I hope someday that Sabalenka realizes that the emotion she puts herself through, she may say that's the very passion which she plays, but she puts herself through these emotions that then create a pattern that doesn't help her at the end of a match. And that's something, and she works on it, she addresses it in a way, and then it kind of regresses. And that's what kind of happened during this match. Rybakina is this cucumber. I'm concerned about all this stuff with the coach and the backstory of that, and the coach having been banned from the tour, and her resenting them, the tour doing that, and the action. So that I guess we'll probably never know about that. We'll never know, and that's unfortunate. But as far as her tennis goes, it's magnificent. She hits the shot she's been taught to hit. She's not going for it. She's hitting the shot she's been taught to hit and that she practiced. And she came up with enough good shots that way, down 3-0, point to go down 4-0 in the third set. Yeah, she comes through. And yeah, she had a little, I guess it was about a 2 year, two or maybe even 3 year period from the whole stuff with the coach. And there was some physical stuff with her not feeling up to competing and all of that. But she's terrific. I don't go, oh, now we have a big three. But I don't do that. I don't like that kind of
Sure.
promulgating of replication. It's like just we don't need to have a big three of anything. We don't have a big one. We don't have a dominant. We just let it all happen.
Well, I'm gonna give you what I think is a fun question, but it's been bandied about a little bit on other podcasts. The question of quantity of slams versus being able to win all four. So there's been a
Oh, you're
question
talking about
about,
the topic. That's someone who opined that maybe Agassi, by having won all four slams, a better player than Pete Sampras.
well, the question was, would you rather have Agassi's career with all the majors and 8 slams, or Sampras's career with 14 slams and no French Open? So what is your take on that?
I think anyone who thinks that is so out to lunch. They're not even funny. Pete Sampras finished the year number one 6 straight times. Andre Agassi did it once. Andre Agassi is a titan of a player. I get it. Pete Sampras went 14-8. It's not 10-8. It was 10-8. That would be an intriguing question. But 14, he won nearly twice as many slams as Andre. So I'm not anyone who think it's I can't even believe someone is opining that. So whoever opines that, I'll gladly meet them and wrestle with them verbally in every way possible. And you even look at that rivalry. Here's an interesting tale of the tape of that rivalry. Around the world, everywhere except London and New York, 14-14. Quick, what do you think the tally was at Wimbledon and the US Open?
There's no question that
What was the tally?
Sampras dominated. I'll give you that.
0.
Yeah, Sampras dominated.
So as far as a
Go ahead.
career you gotta have, it's kind of not doing a fair thing to Sampras. It's kind of it's
Yeah,
a contemporary, it's a recency bias triggered by career slam
right.
mania. And I know we've had, since Sampras retired, we've had 4 men accomplish it in an era where it's much easier to accomplish. Much easier. We realized that the grass got slower thanks to Lexilon and string and racket technology. The clay got faster. The gap between Paris and London is much narrower than it used to be. Don't forget the role of 32 seeds, which minimizes the early round upset possibility. I mean, tell Pete Sampras, hey, you don't worry, buddy. You don't have to play anyone ranked inside the top 32 the first couple of rounds. That's
Yeah.
going to save you some wear and tear. Maybe that happens. Maybe he does win a French.
Well, you're talking to somebody, first of all, who's a huge Sampras guy, and I have had the privilege of having Steve Flink on the show, and Steve talked about Sampras and Hall of Famer Steve Flink and his Sampras book. Huge Sampras fan, and many people, digressing here, don't realize how good Sampras actually was on the red clay. And
Did win the Italian.
he won the Davis Cup. His victory
Yeah,
was
but also it's just like it's it's what you'd rather have. I mean, it's kind of it speaks to a certain type of career slam mania that kind of doesn't understand the totem-like significance in Sampras's time of Wimbledon, the U.S. Open, that they were unquestionably, as I wrote in an article, I compared the 4 majors to the Beatles. They were the John and Paul. And it's fine that, look, the French is the George and the Australian was Ringo for a long time. I don't subscribe to that view as much anymore because both of those other 2 majors in Melbourne and Paris have become more significant for many reasons. But I would not say, I don't even think it's the right question to ask whose career would you rather have, all 4 majors or that. I mean, for example, okay, Maria Sharapova, who won 5. I'm trying to think of a person who didn't win the French. I got to think about that. A person who won more. Maria Sharapova,
yeah.
she has the career slam, and who's a woman who won. Or okay, all right. Maria Sharapova's career with 5 that way, but she won all 4. Or Justine Anna, who won 7 and
Yeah.
didn't win Wimbledon.
That was the example that was given, by the way, a little earlier on a podcast. Henin, Justine Enna, and Sharapova.
I'll take Sharapova. Now I wouldn't. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to say that.
It's okay.
I'll take Justine Anna.
Right. But anyway, it was just a fun. analysis. But let me talk a little bit more now, a little bit about your journey into tennis journalism. We had talked in the past, and I know you were in Tony Trabert. I think you went to Tony Trabert's camp.
Four
And
summers I went there and two I worked there. Yes.
yeah, so that, I mean, there's so much to unpack there. Tony Trabert, a Hall of Famer, also a great broadcaster with Pat Summerall. So there's a lot. I mean, if that's your tennis background, and then it also included, I believe, the era that you were growing up in some of the great tennis. So you could talk a little bit about how you
Sure.
fell in love with what I consider to be the greatest game on the planet.
That's a great series of questions, Adam. Great. I was very
Thanks.
lucky. I was 10 years old in 1970 when my family moved to Los Angeles, and for a number of reasons, my mother got into tennis, and I started playing. And this is really the period where tennis is going technicolor. Tennis is transforming itself from kind of the garden party for the classes into the sport somewhat for the masses. And the game is blossoming. From I think in 1970 there were seven events on television. 6 or 7 years later there were 70. The game is on TV all the time. That's a big way in getting us to experience a game, particularly in the three network era. Well, in PBS, so there's four. Tony ran a camp in Ojai, a town about 85 miles northwest of Los Angeles, where I was living. He was there at the camp, and he'd been a Hall of Fame player. He was just starting the TV work, so that was enthralling to watch a guy tell me, as a lefty, to serve wide in the ad court, to do this and do that. And then a few weeks later, he's saying the same thing about Rod Laver. So that being around Southern California and the tennis boom in the 70s is like growing up around country music in Nashville.
Great
And you're
analogy.
just kind of like taking it all in at a high level. That doesn't mean I was happy to win a round or two in a junior tournament, and I won, like, did well okay in these smaller park tournaments and stuff like that. But to be around to the game, to see John McEnroe play in college, to see Jimmy Connors practice at UCLA, all of that, and to live in the same school district as Jack Kramer and his kids was all just kind of part of the whole milieu. So it was kind of like being exposed to it in a very kind of Olympian level.
Well, I know you graduate from college with a degree in history.
Yes.
You are a tennis historian, so what was kind of the progression into journalism and tennis history?
I knew I wanted to be a writer after I was 19 and saw the LSAT. You're an attorney, and the LSAT is
Sure.
it's kind of like playing Nadal on consecutive days on clay. It's only more, except at least I think the LSAT is maybe two out of three. The bar is like playing every day at Roland
I
Garros.
love these analogies. These are great.
So I knew I didn't want to be a lawyer. I wanted to be a writer. I was very involved in like culture and literature and politics, and I had a chance to do a free internship at a publication in DC called Roll Call. But around that same time, I got a chance to write for a local tennis magazine, Inside Tennis. And Bill Simons, the editor there, gave me a shot to write some things. I covered a tournament. I wrote a humorous story and began, whoa, I've been sent on earth to write about tennis. Of course, me and tennis. I was meant to write about tennis. That was a paying job. I did that for a little while. And I knew then I wanted to be in the tennis, though I worked for 10 years in the public relations agency business because no one hires you when you're 23. The New Yorker doesn't say, "Oh, would you be our West Coast tennis writer? Would you write four pieces a year for us for $15,000 each? Is that okay? Can we do that?" That doesn't work that way. So I had to get on and figure out a way to make money and kept a pinky toe in tennis. Then I was about 33. I started freelancing more, and then one thing led to another. But the history is really from a very young age. I enjoyed reading about the game. I was very much like one of these kids who goes to the 796 section of the library where all the sports books are located. And even before the tennis, I was reading about baseball and football and basketball. And I started to bring that to tennis. And I was about 6 months into playing, and it was December 7th, 1972, because I said to my brother that day, I go, "Hey, guess what? Tomorrow's Julie Hellman's birthday." Brother looked at me and he goes, "You know, if you play tennis a little more than you read about it or talked about it, you might be a good player one day." And that has made all the difference. And he had a point. But I really enjoyed studying the history, and I think maybe that I majored in history, not that I majored in tennis history, was kind of a nice confluence of a methodology because if you study history exciting kind of way, as happened at the school at college I went to. They they teach it in a way that teaches you the idea of history, not just the things that occurred in a certain period, but what it means. Just as an attorney learns to think as a legal person, history major learns to understand the layers and texture, the connection of ideas, the way ideas uh, work in events and occurrences and trends and people.
So I'm kind of reeling over the Julie Heldman reference. Obviously, she's one of the original nine, daughter of Gladys Heldman of World Tennis Magazine, and also, of course, a Hall of Famer. What a great reference when you say to your brother, it's Julie Heldman's birthday. I love that. That is destiny. That's certainly things to come that you
That's
knew
right.
that. Um, Jimmy Connors saved my life. Thought-provoking book, which I have my copy right here if you're looking for it. Uh, and that
All
is
right, here we go.
look at that. Look at this.
Yeah,
That's the
that is
T2000
the one and only, the one and
created
only.
built by Rene Lacoste. I know that.
That is
Uh,
correct. Look at this thing. My
yeah,
God. Let's see, what's that sweet spot about the size of your fingernail? What do you
it's
think here?
unbelievable that how flat.
So, yeah, so anyway, that's right. So the Jimmy Connors book. So tell me what you want to hear with
Well,
that.
I'm fascinated in a lot of ways frankly, by Jimmy Connors. I think he's an enigma. I've read his book. I've read your book. I've read his book. Um, he's certainly a different cat now than he was back in the day. I listened to his podcast with his son. He certainly evolved differently, but one of the most interesting, controversial players of all time, a tremendous winner. I mean, there was nobody like him, his determination, his grit. This is, I actually was present when he came back to play Aaron Crickstein at the St. Andrews Country Club in Boca to kind of relive that match, if you will. And I should, they kind of had a hit and giggle of that match, if you will. It was almost like you felt good for both of them. And the same umpire that he had
David
dropped,
Littlefield was in the chair for
he
that one?
was he wasn't in the chair. David Littlefield came out afterwards and surprised Jimmy because Jimmy had said something to
We're not
David
going
that
to quote it. We're not going
don't
to
you
quote
can't
it.
quote it, but yeah, he said something to David that wasn't great, but and of course, as a my own little tennis historian, if you will, I love tennis history. I did have my picture signed by David Littlefield and Aaron Kirkstein and Jimmy, that historic photo of them at the net. But anyway, just a fascinating guy. I can understand why you chose to write about him, but I guess my biggest question you would be, you got to know Jimmy, you got to meet Jimmy, spend some time with Jimmy. What, as you look back at everything, what's your take on Jimmy, his evolution? What's the evolution of your relationship? I don't even know what to call it with Jimmy. And what are your takeaways? I mean, I encourage everyone, by the way,
Wait,
to
okay,
read
you
this
just asked
book.
me three questions. Those are three questions. Well, tell me what's one question? Give me one question. Let's start with one.
The nature of your current relationship with, let's talk about your current relationship with Jimmy Connors if you're comfortable talking about that.
Well, I'm going to tell you something interesting that happened that there's a certain affinity I will always have for Jimmy Connors. And someone said to me once, look, we know he's polarizing. We know he's not always at the most he never won the sportsmanship award, and he's no, understands that about himself, but he certainly won the competitor award. And my connection to Jimmy Connors has to do with the meaning, the ways that he helped shape how I see success and the world. That Jimmy Connors, I wrote this, he showed me what it pointed me a way towards success. About if you want to be great at something, not just good at something, you've got to bring your heart and soul to it. And I'll be forever indebted to him for giving me that kind of avatar. I was a very, as the earlier anecdote indicates, I was a little more natural observer than a participant. But you see, if you want to accomplish things in life, you can't just be an observer. And there's this way that Connor showed me as a teenage boy. Initially, I didn't like him. I thought he was a punk. I liked labor. I liked those Australians. But I kind of said, wait a second. That's my generation. Connor is my generation. He lived in the air. He had his rackets strung at the same place where my high school teammates had our rackets strung. A friend of mine was a ball boy and a poster of him. he played at a club where friends of mine, so he was this local avatar, but he was kind of a rocket fuel for my concept of what it means to be successful in the world. And yeah, it's not always so gracious. I wrote this story in the book about how when I was 14, I played someone who wouldn't play with me. He would duck me. We all have someone like that when you're young and they won't play with you and they diss you. And then I thought I was a net rusher in Southern California. I came and he had this two-handed backhand and he was kind of a methodical player. I said, I'm going to be all over him. I'm going to come to net 80 times, just all over him. And I beat him at this park tournament and I wrote in my book, I said, it was the first time I realized a tennis match wasn't just about who hit the ball better. It was personal. And that's very Connor's influenced. And I wrote about it was the first time I tasted blood in a tennis match. And I liked it. And I understood from Connors that if you wanted to be something great in the world, you had to be willing to leave your own blood and bring that. And I remember when I was working in public relations, I was asking a boss, we were talking about writing and what it took to write. Well, he says, well, a good writer can write about anything. And I said, I don't want to be a good writer. What do you think I meant by that?
You want to be a great writer.
That's right. That's right. I didn't want to hit
Yeah.
285. I didn't want to hit 285. I wanted to hit 330. And Connors showed away a very visceral, as we all know from any who saw him play, a very visceral, compelling way of doing it, no matter who he was playing. No matter who he's playing. And it's a little bit like what Nadal is. And the thing about Jimmy Connors to me that's interesting, everything tennis wants to be starts, contemporary tennis wants to be, starts with Jimmy Connors. Every time you see a player pump their fist or show emotion, they should send him a royalty check because that all starts with Jimmy Connors. He's the Elvis.
Well, where
He's,
is Nastasi though in that
he's Sammy Davis. He's an entertainer. But he's not connecting with crowds. He's acting like a I would should I say clown? He's a court jester. Remember the problem with Nastasi, he had some years where he was quite good. He was kind of but he was quite good, but he wasn't winning enough to justify it. Connors was winning year after year after year, and Nastasi wasn't connecting with the crowd. Nastasi was disrupting his opponent and being cheeky. So Nastasi is kind of like the Godfather punk of that. What is he? Is he Little Richard? Is he doing some other kind of thing? Is he singing? Where Connors is the Elvis. He's the first rock star, and he before Connors, they're all great, but they were crooners. They were understated. You didn't know what they were classy. They're great. I love the Australians and what they stand for. But Connors, what does tennis want now? It's wants emotion, passion, connection with the crowds. Even the style. Nadal plays a lot like Connors, except he's got some more margin on his forehand. I mean, a little different than Jimmy that way. And look at Novak. Look at the way Novak plays. How similar this to Connors. I'm going to just grind you. I'm going to hit cross court. I'm going to return serve. You're going to work all day. So Connors' fingerprints are all over the game. Federer had this epic ambition, a long time. The longevity people. Connors, Rosewall, Agassi. These are the guys who last a long time. Connors set the bar. 109 titles. All of that. So I think it would be great to hear more from him about that. So for me, that's meaningful public. It's also personal. I mean, there's a lot of an interesting epilogue to my book. 6 years after Connors writes the book, the woman who most inspired me to write it, my wife at the time, Joan Edwards, died on September 2nd, 2010. Do you know what September 2nd is in tennis history?
Please tell me.
That's Jimmy Connors' birthday.
I
She
love
died
it.
on Jimmy Connors' birthday.
Love
And
it.
he knew
I
that
mean,
because we so
sorry for your loss.
but you
I
know
didn't
what?
mean it that way.
Of
Yeah.
course not. If look, how great that it could happen that way,
Yeah.
that connection. And he knew that, and he and I have talked about that. So I feel very I never tire of pondering Jimmy Connors and his impact on the sport and myself too, and what he did to kind of legitimize tennis. I mean, you grow up in America, and tennis wasn't always considered a legitimate sport. How many times do you hear someone say, "Oh, he's a good tennis player, he's not an athlete"? Well, go look at Connors and go tell me it's not a sport.
No, it is interesting. I have I'm in the process actually, honestly, of reading that book, that emotional. book with that you wrote about your wife's passing, and it is interesting as we kind of kind of talking this out with you that you went from Connors to your wife's passing, and so
Right.
obviously they're both. I'm not comparing the two, but obviously they're powerful in your lives. I'm not comparing, believe me, but it was interesting that Connors, you wrote that book and then
Well,
the
I
book.
met my wife the same summer I met Connors, and I told her soon after we began our relationship. I said this in 1982. I said 1982. I'm 22 years old. I said one day I'm going to write a book about him that's going to explain to people what tennis is really about. And she said in 1982, you will. And the book came out 22 years later. So,
Wow.
and it's like, and I follow guys to the ends of the earth just to play them again, just like Connors would say. And so I know how I have the tenacity gene, and I get that, and that whole concept of having that as a North Star, having that as a quest, and what he meant to me, writing about him, and also using him, not using him, but him as the way of explaining to people, this is what tennis really is. And I say to people, you think tennis with the room is Room with a View? You think it's Merchant Ivory? No, tennis is Goodfellas. Tennis
That
is Goodfellas. That's the game. And and so to play the game and understand, I've come to see many different things through other people. I've learned a great much from the Australians about how you can do both. You can simultaneously try to destroy someone in the battle and then shake their
right.
hand and have dinner with them. That's something I learned a lot. Also, I've seen a lot of that from working with Charlie Pasarell as well.
Yeah, obviously depends on how you're wound. I got to know Fred Stolle
I love Fred
a
Stolle.
bit, the late Fred Stolle, and I would imagine he certainly wasn't gonna act on the court the way he was acting during dinner when we were just having a jovial time. And I know Steve Contardi, I know has those the
I'm wearing
wonderful.
it right now. See
Oh,
those
there you go, there you
tennis
go.
memories. Yeah, I knew Fred very well from that. I knew him
Right,
also. We worked in parallel ways in television. When I worked doing
sure.
work in television and interviewed him many, many times.
One of my favorite people, and but there's an interesting contrast, obviously, between someone who carries himself like the Australians versus Jimmy Connors. And then there's the person we really, well, first of all, I do want to say, what is the title, if you don't mind, of the book about your passing of your wife that people should really look at?
Oh, that book is called "Don't Bet on It."
Don't bet on it. Okay,
There's
I
even a
am in the
there's
process
a
of reading
tennis
that.
there's a tennis connection to that title, but I won't get into it now. I'll let you see.
Well,
I'll let
whenever
you.
you say don't bet, I think of Bobby Riggs, but when you
It's
say bet,
nothing to do with
nothing to
his
do with Bobby
nothing to do
Riggs.
with
Okay.
gambling.
All right, but I would encourage people to read that one too, and this great book right here, Jimmy Connor
Thank you.
Saved My Life. You're
Thank you.
welcome. You're welcome. Um, so now I'm trying to think. You go from obviously Jimmy Connors to the passing of your wife, Charlie Pasarell, someone who I've had the pleasure of meeting. I think I mentioned to you just shortly before we started that I actually did say, "Hey, it's so nice to meet you." I was at a USTA meeting. Can I talk to you a little bit about that match with Pancho Gonzalez in 1969? I mean, it's an epic match. He must be asked about it all day. He was gracious as can be, but I'm going to
Adam,
ask
I'll
you.
give you a little hint. We talked about some of this. I'm going to give you a hint if you continue your
Yeah,
journalism broadcast career. This is
sure.
my hint. If you want to kind of like, for lack of a better term, connect with a legend, he'll talk about that match. But you gotta have a little more armed in your quiver. So you got to talk about how about his first round upset of defending champion Manolo Santana at Wimbledon 1967. His interview. Put the subject in the good light. Always start with a win, and then
All
you
right.
could. Then,
I,
then
I did. I did. Because I will tell you, I started with his participation with the NJTLs because he was
Oh,
getting
that's
he
lovely.
was
That's
getting an award. So I didn't just say, "It's so nice to meet you. Tell me about." I had a little more savvy than that. So
okay.
I
There
did
you go.
talk.
All right. Okay.
I did congratulate him on getting. He was getting an award that night in the NJTL arena because he's Mr. Pay It Forward. But quite an interesting contrast, Charlie Pasarell to you know
Jimmy
Jimmy
Connors,
Connors.
completely
And
very interesting. And I'll tell you something interesting about it, Adam. First of all, yes, that's great. Charlie Pasarell, along with Arthur Ashe and Sheridan Snyder, the co-founders of the NJTL, which then segues into becoming the US State Foundation, with the NJTL, hundreds of NJTL programs all around the country.
those are the National Junior Tennis and Learning Programs for
That's right.
those who may not be as informed as
That's right. Just tremendous,
right.
tremendous programs all around the country. Um, yeah, and the interesting thing is the Connors book is written in my voice, very much me on Connors. This is Charlie and I collaborating to bring his voice. This is Charlie's story. And Charlie, you learn more from Charlie as I have from the Australians. Well, wait, you can concurrently, your opponents can be your friends, and you can go out there and compete with them, shake their hands, have dinner with them, and have both those opposing ideas in your mind. That was a little hard for me when I was a teenager. I'm 5'7". I got to prove myself. I grew up in a very, very competitive section, Southern California, kind of the Ivy League of tennis section. So you didn't even make eye contact with certain players. It was just a whole hierarchy that way, or at least it felt that way.
Sure.
But Charlie, just one of the most gracious, kind, thoughtful people, a great player, also number one in the country in 1967, beat all the great players of his time, Hall of Famer, and a real visionary, and also a community builder. He built three major tennis facilities in 19 years. That's just incredible.
Well, thanks to you and your work on the Tennis Worthy podcast, I did get to hear a lot about Charlie Pasarell and his relationship with Arthur Ashe. Fascinating. I think the most fascinating part, so he was his roommate, I believe, at UCLA.
Right?
But I think the most fascinating part of that interview to me was just the simple Charlie saying, I didn't know how special he was. He was just my roommate, tennis player. I didn't realize, what he had gone through, what he was up against. And I think that's because you're living in a certain time in a bubble. But he reflected on just how lucky he was to have gotten to know him.
Anyone would be fortunate to certainly know Arthur Ashe and also, but Charlie Pascal. These are both extraordinary people. The things they do. I mean, John McPhee in the great book Levels of the Game writes about Charlie. So Charlie Pascal could be anyone's friend or best friend because he's just so warm and welcoming and kind and thoughtful and thinks about the greater good of many. Hence things like the NJTL. Hence things like building these three incredible facilities that he built to give more people the chance to enjoy the sport we love so much.
Well, people are in for a great book because he's got a Hall of Fame career. Uh, I'm sure tremendous anecdotes about co-founding Indian Wells, I believe, with
No, he found it. No, Raymore came later.
Raymond Moore came later. Thank you. Already, we're better for you having told us that. This is good.
Raymore, Charlie was the one who had the tournament starting at the Kings in 1981, and Raymond joined a few years later, and they became partners. So, yeah.
All right. I just get a cut to it. How do I get a signed copy of this book? Where is the book signing?
Well,
How do I make
the
this
book's not
happen?
available till spring.
Okay.
You'll order it and you'll get it. You'll figure out the way. I know. I can already tell, Adam, you're a man of intention and follow through. You'll figure out a way to do that. You'll figure a way to get it.
Yeah,
So,
and I am on very involved with the Tennis Collectors of America, and I want to thank you
oh,
in
it's Charlie
advance.
and I speaking there. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to try to get there if I can, but you're going to be speaking there, and I hope to be there. But yeah, I will get a signed copy of this book, and when you come back, we will talk about the book on the next show. I will have my signed copy and have an inscription like to Adam, the only person I know who knows more about tennis than me. I'm not saying that's true, but if you could write that, it would
There
be
are no
incredibly appreciated.
rankings. You're looking for the rankings. As you know, look, we've been around the game. It's not about the rankings. It's about
Yeah,
going out there every day
yeah.
and writing the best possible story. It's all you can do. You can't control the other. There are no rankings but the tennis, you got, plus we're in a world that's had people like Bud Collins and
I was
Steve.
going to get there too. Yeah, I was going to get there.
Okay.
I'm gonna get to some of the, but I guess now's a great time. You mentioned Bud Collins. What he did for the tennis world. I was everyone has a mentor. My mentor was Jim Martz, the founder of Florida Tennis.
Lovely.
Um, one of the nicest people. Matt Pressman met Jim and bought the magazine from him, and the plan was for Jim to mentor Matt, who's a super guy, and unfortunately Jim left us much too soon. But um, Jim would tell me stories about sitting in the press box near Bud and near Arthur Ashe, and it was Arthur Ashe who Jim had actually gone to and said, "What do you think? I'm thinking about leaving the Miami Herald and starting a tennis magazine." But can you just tell us a little bit about Bud Collins or any other mentors you may have had that you would like to talk about?
It's funny. This is my spirit of Jimmy Connors and doing things as an individual. I learn from a lot of people. Mentor to me is a little attaches a little too much significance.
Sure.
Like, but people I've learned from, lots of people. Bud Collins was such a gracious person. Bud Collins was a really saw tennis as part of this group of morons, lots of people. Always, you could show up. He never big time someone. In fact, I told this to my colleague Leslie Visser, and she used it at Bud Collins' memorial that we attended in Boston. But it's almost 10 years ago. He never had a B list, Bud Collins. You never felt big time by him, and he could be right there as he should with NBC. He earned that job, and he did a great job there, and talk with the people at NBC, Dick Enberg, and people at the All England Club. And then if you showed, you could show up from the Poughkeepsie Gazette. But is this your first time at the US Open? How are you doing? Good to see you, Adam. Nice to meet you. And 6 hours later, you'd walk by, Adam, how's it going today? You getting some good stories? Total man of the people. And that was the greatest lesson you could see from Bud Collins, how he treated people and the kindness which he always treated them. I worked with him some at Tennis Channel, and he was always exemplary, just a kind, good person. Spent time with him and his wife Anita, really good people. But other people I've learned from, I mean, Steve Flink has been a buddy of mine for 35 plus years. He published one of the first articles I wrote about Jimmy Connors in the late World Tennis magazine. John Barrett, the British historian, I find tremendously Olympian in his view of the game, of the sport, of the texture, of the history. Fantastic. Also a great player. I mean, lots of people. I wrote for Gene Scott. He was interesting, always looking for different angles. Rex Bellamy is a writer I read a lot of, who I found tremendously compelling. I mean, lots of people. I mean, that's studying the game. I mean, I work with Mary Carrillo, who'll be getting the Hall of Fame. She and I have worked together at 5 television networks. I've worked alongside her many times, so that was very exciting. I mean, a lot of people in this game, they're very much who they are. So you learn from them all the time. I've worked with Tracy Austin. You see the mentality she brought that made her a champion, makes her a champion broadcaster. So all these people.
No, I can't agree more. I have had the privilege of meeting Mary Carrillo and Tracy Austin. They've been very gracious. And Steve Flink has been a friend to the podcast. I mean, he's come on a number of times and he's
Great.
fascinating. I did meet Bud Collins. I met Bud Collins more in the context of he would be selling his encyclopedia at
Sure.
the Miami Open, and it was just fantastic. We would talk a little bit, and he was incredibly gracious with that.
Yeah, here we go. Randy
Yeah,
Brock.
that's it. There
You
it
go.
is.
There
There's
you
the
go. Other
Bible.
person I learned, other person I can't help but mention is Hall of Famer Richard Evans, who I read a
Sure.
lot as I read a lot of, just like Bud and some of Steve. I read these guys when I was a teenager, and they painted the picture of the circuit. I mean, Richard, there's no journalist who will ever go to more tennis tournaments than Richard Evans.
Yeah,
I mean,
I have had the pleasure of spending a little bit of time with him here in Florida, and it's funny. Just another gracious. I mean, I've interviewed Leslie Visser. Sweet, nice. I think you used the best term. They don't big time you. You just they don't. They're very courteous and they don't forget, where they're from. So I have to give them some kudos too. But you've covered all the majors. So I think we all have an opinion about the differences in the majors. And I think if you asked fans, they could all say, well, I've been to this one. But what are the differences behind the scenes? Behind the
well,
scenes.
they're behind the scenes. Depends on what the particular job is. I mean, if I told you, the TV is its own distinct vibe compared to print. They're very different processes by which stories are created and how the work day flows. Um, they're each different. I mean, look, you've got the Roland Garros is in French, so not the only one that's not in English, and it's on clay, and it's a smaller, intimate venue, and there's that to it. Wimbledon is the cathedral. I would say to anyone, no matter what you're doing, if it's work, if it's play, if you're part of a tour group, Wimbledon is the one you want to go to. Wimbledon is every bit the pinnacle that it was for many decades, and it remains that. It's just incredible. The ultimate club term. I think, okay, so let's see here. Wimbledon is like the ultimate club tournament. Every flower bed, every corner, everything is immaculate. It's like the ultimate club tournament. Australia feels like the ultimate for the public tournament. Come on in. I mean, I think there's unlimited grounds passes there. I thought that for a while about the US Open. The US Open to me has become a lot more, obviously a lot more corporate,
Hmm.
a lot more entertaining on the part of people. So maybe it's the ultimate okay, let's say, take your friend, take your client to the US Open, take your significant other to Wimbledon, take your buddy to the take your buddy
The
to
Aussie Open.
Aussie. So let's see, and take your new romance. You know, if the romance is in early stage, take your new romance to Roland Garros. Maybe is that maybe how we want to look at
I
it?
think it's perfect. I think the analogies you're hitting on this show, as soon as you said the four Beatles and compared them to the majors, I love that. I was going to ask you about the monkeys, but I'm not even going to go there tonight. I was
Well,
going to
let's see. I think
so
Davy
all
Jones.
right, do it. Let's do it. Who?
No, no, I'm not going to go.
All right.
That's okay.
Okay.
No, no,
All right.
no. I'm not a believer on that. I'm not yet a
You're
believer.
not a believer. Okay.
I know.
That's clever. The Neil Diamond I'm a Believer might have been their biggest song, but all right. We're not going to talk about the monkeys, but
Neil Diamond wrote "I'm a Believer."
yes, he did. Yeah. He wrote he
Wow.
wrote he wrote probably the monkeys' biggest hit, I'm a Believer. He wrote a little bit me, a little bit you.
Oh,
Yeah, no, he's they were getting a lot of songs from through Don Kirshner from the Brill Building, and it was Carole King, it was Neil Diamond, and
wow.
yeah.
Is Sadaka in the mix at all? Or was he just doing it?
Yes, Neil Sedaka definitely is in the mix in there. But look, I could talk about the monkeys for a different
Oh,
podcast.
okay. So okay,
A different podcast, but
a different
uh
podcast for a different time.
yes, yes. Um I'm very impressed by the fact that you're the historian at large at the Hall of Fame. But I'm thinking to myself, what does the historian at large do on a day? Like, what does that mean? I know it means that you're contributing a lot to the podcast, but how does that come about? I'm going to start from the beginning. How do you get named historian at large? Who tells you that? What
Well,
does it mean?
that was a function of some things I discussed. That was in the time when Todd Martin was running the Hall of
Todd
Fame.
Martin, you did tell me a little bit about this.
That's
Okay,
right.
good.
And that happened with Todd. And it's not, I do different projects for the Hall of Fame. I write certain pieces. Uh, I do research that involves not just the Tennis Worthy podcast, but other aspects of the Tennis Worthy initiative. I spend a lot of time in the archives of decades of oral history interviews that have been done by the Hall of Fame. So I, I sort through all of those and I work with people, the whole Hall of Fame team to kind of organize content around that, to write certain stories at certain times, to write stories about inductees, to write stories about the induction ceremony, all sorts of things.
Well, I thought it was fascinating, and I heard this on the pod, the Tennis Worthy pod, that the American lawn tennis has now been in a in a form. It's online. It's
Right.
been it's online, which is for those of people who don't know, that was the Bible of tennis back in the day. I think S. Robert Merriu? Was he
Yeah, I
the
think it was until about
okay?
50. When did America 46? When did America?
I'm not even sure of the dates.
That was pre World Tennis,
Right.
and Nicole Markham at the Hall of Fame organized and went
Yes.
through a lot of issues. I need to spend some more time with American lawn tennis. I
Yeah.
still enjoy spending time with world tennis, but American lawn tennis is pretty
Yeah.
quite goes quite deep.
You've written a lot of great articles. You've told me about Fingerprints for Racket Magazine. It was kind of a fascinating story, which you can certainly talk about again. But I'm curious about what you find makes a tennis story compelling beyond just the wins and the losses. What draws Joel Drucker to write about tennis?
Great question, Adam. I think for me, I'm more of a feature magazine person than I am a news person. I've done plenty of news stories and covered plenty of matches, but I think I was always drawn to kind of like magazines and narrative and something that has a angle. Let's talk about Fingerprints, for example, and how this came about. I read a lot of things that are not about tennis. Lots of books about lots of things. And I'm in a bookstore when I was living in the San Francisco Bay Area. I see a book called Bukowski in a Sundress. It's a collection of essays by a woman named Kim Adenizio. It's kind of interesting. Paperback. Start reading it. And I see she has a piece about her mother, who's a tennis player. Whoa, it's pretty interesting. Her mother was the great tennis player Pauline Betts.
Fascinating.
who won four US titles and won Wimbledon the only time she ever played it, 1946. And the father, Pauline's husband, was a guy named Bob Addy, sports writer for the Washington Post. It's interesting too. So Kim, as it turns out, lived in Oakland where I was living at the time. And I connected with her and chatted with her. And I thought, particularly as I got to do a lot of work with Racket Magazine about the kind of stories they were interested in, I thought, I want to learn about you and your mother. Like I asked Kim, I said, what's poetry really about? She goes, poetry is taking thought and putting it into action. I said, well, that's kind of like being a tennis player. And Kim had taken lessons from her mom and played and was around the game some. And so I thought, I want to do a story about you and the influence of your mother on you, the influence of you on your mother. So I spent a lot of time with Kim. And I think to me, the stories that I've most enjoyed are ones where I can define an arc that cuts across, connects it to culture in a way, just like the way I was able to connect Connors to the 70s and things in American society. I wrote a piece for the New York Times about why Connors became the darling of New York in a way that John McEnroe, who grew up in New York, did not, and why Connors personified what New York was going through in the 70s. You know, Connors is like right out of Dog Day Afternoon and Taxi Driver and all that network and all that anger and horror that was going on in New York then. And Connors could click into that. So back to Fingerprints, I spent a lot of time with Kim and I learned a lot about Pauline. And I learned a lot about the similarities between the mother and the daughter and the role of tennis and how they each evolved. So to me, it has to do with setting it against also Pauline was very much, she dated Spencer Tracy, she dated Jack Dempsey. She had a quality to her that was kind of clever, a little bit like those women like Barbara Stanwyck and Katharine Hepburn in the 30s and 40s. There was kind of a snappy, high energy quality to her, a bit of a bit cheeky. And I thought, let me just explore how they both became, how Kim became a poet. So I like finding that kind of angle, finding that angle. And I guarantee you, there's no one on the planet who would have unearthed Bukowski in a sundress to get to a Wimbledon champion.
No, I can honestly say if there was a Hall of Fame for that, Joel, qualitatively, you're in. Okay. Now, a segue, I'm trying to figure out, looking at all this, it seems like a perfect segue into tennisplayer.net. This is your forum with Matt and what is it? What can people expect to see? What are your goals with it? And tell us about it.
We want people, like I said a little while ago, learn, compete, improve. John Yandell created a real vision, a real legacy of quality instruction. I want a certain kind of depth and intimacy. And I was thinking about the connection between these service-oriented articles and the stories I like to write. And I think I pride them both on a certain type of intimacy, of knowledge. Like I don't just want a story on the serve and how to serve better. I want a story on the toss. I want I want someone to feel really empowered and in a place like this is going to help me improve. And so in a way, it takes me back in its own odd way to my roots in tennis or as a player. I mean, my brother was right about that. Look, I'm an okay civilian as a player, and helped. Nothing I did with my racket is what made all these great things happen, per se. However, none of these things would have happened if I hadn't held a racket. And so tennisplayer.net takes me in a way to my essential roots in the game as a player. I mean, there have been times I thought, if I had a choice of playing or writing, I could find other things to write about. But the whole playing, the whole participant aspect of the game. And so we want to create content that people really dig into, that feel like they have an understand. And there's hundreds of articles have been written over the years that John commissioned and edited and helped bring to life on all sorts of topics from fitness to serving to the volley to the transition game to spins. And that's the kind of territory we're living in. I want the 16-year-old player who wants to really ramp up and do well at the Orange Bowl to see that article over the surf. Wow, that has some useful information for me.
How does
I
this
want the
all
adult. Go on.
sorry, how does this all tie in with tennis history?
Well, that's a great question. Well, look at it this way: the history of techniques, the paradigms that might be undone. Someone is working from an article on the evolution of the forehand, and maybe the connection. I think teachers should understand how techniques have evolved. So in some articles, I'd like there to be sort of a historical route for that to explain the evolution of even teaching technique. I mean, I've talked to teachers who show me a picture of May Sutton hitting a semi-open forehand in 1905 that's not too far distant from today's forehand. And so maybe the instructors can bring some historical sense to that. Are they going to be telling stories about those players from the past? Probably not unless they're serving an instructional point, like the evolution,
Sure.
how the volley is taught and how we think about the volley. The volley, like for example, you hear the swing volley. Don Budge had a swing volley at times. Did he hit it like that with a topspin? Not quite. But there are things going on. So I want people to see that too, because I think every player will be a better player if they understand the history of the game more. Just like a musician. If we were studying music, you'd want to know who Mozart was.
So ultimately, someone like me who's been playing for many years, I don't love my two-handed backhand. I go on tennisplayer.net and I can read endlessly about the two-handed backhand.
You read endlessly about the two-hand backhand. I recommend you read about it, but I also recommend you then work with a teacher, find a teacher who can really help you learn it. But I think it can really inform your understanding of the game
Sure.
more. Absolutely.
I do have a tennis pro. He's not proud to admit it, but I do have a pro I see every Sunday for many years. So
Well, for
we're still
example,
working
a
on it.
two-handed backhand, there's talk about what's the better grip to hold, what's the take back involved, which foot
Yes,
you step with first. There's a lot of recent dialogue about which step do we, it used to be that you step across, but if you step across too soon, you lose all your energy.
right, right.
So how do you really get behind the ball and how do you step with the outside foot first?
Well, I will be spending a lot of time on tennisplayer.net. So congratulations on working on that with Matt, and you will see me on that site. But
Two-hander,
now, what's that?
two-hander, okay.
Yeah,
Two-hander. Are
yeah.
you Eastern on the grip or
I
what's the
I I don't change grip, man. I'm Eastern on both on how I hold it. It's
okay,
really
so you're kind
Eastern.
of in the Chrissy. You're kind of like a Chrissy.
I
You could
wish I was like, are you kidding? We have to cut that out. Chrissy doesn't want any part of my two-handed backhand, okay? That's another one. Steve Flink and Chrissy Everett. You don't tell Steve Flink you said I had a Chrissy Everett backhand. That's not going to go well. All right.
all right,
Let's not
I will.
go there. Don't do that. We're editing that out. All right. Rapid fire questions because I don't know why. It seems like podcasts have rapid fire questions. We're going to do that. Um, Here we go. And I think this kind of ties in, but some players from the past that you think would thrive today. And I know that's a weird question because everyone says, well, it's different. But
Pete
who do you,
Sampras, Maureen Connolly, Don Budge.
wow,
Okay.
just
All
you hit it.
right.
You hit it, no problem.
All right. Of course.
Pistol Pete, Don Budge,
Pete,
love
sure.
it.
Don Budge, Maureen Connolly.
Little Mo, love it. Okay. Do you want to say why on any of those or
Oh,
you
I
just want
thought it
to?
was a rapid
It
fire. I
was
thought you
rapid fire. You know what? We're going to stick rapid fire. What excites you most about tennis right now and as we move into the future?
I enjoy seeing Alcaraz bring a game, not just of today, but he brought a game of tomorrow. I was talking to a father once of a 12-year-old who's getting pretty good. And I said to him that he needs to serve and volley more in doubles. He needs to build a broader set of skills. Well, he's playing the game of today. I go, I don't want him playing the game of today. I want him playing the game of tomorrow. Because the game of tomorrow is going to beat the game of today. And the game of tomorrow is the game of all eternity. Alcaraz excites me because he contains multitudes. He brings all the history of the game with him. And I don't just mean that for the history, I mean for the sake of effectiveness. The sake of effectiveness. Because the Sinner talks about after losing that US Open final, he says, I need to be more unpredictable. Because he knows that, because I'm convinced that we will always wonder what do the great players do that no one else does? What have they come up with? Because, we know that Alexander Zverev, he's 99.9% as good as those guys who are winning titles. So what's that extra thing? And I think what the great players do at some point in the match, more off, maybe mostly in the later stages, but sometimes even early, they do something that pulls the tablecloth out and they break a pattern. And that doesn't just help them win 1 point, it helps them win 10 more points because you're just like, whoa, I thought this was the pattern. And you suddenly did that? Why? Whoa. And then you're disrupted.
Is the drop shot that he seems to have used to great effectiveness, is that something you're talking about? Do you see that as a key shot for him?
I think the drop shot, I think the sneak into attack, I think the occasional mix up the approach shot, like just when you think he's going to drop shot, he kind of side spins it down the line. I think the kick serve and volley. I think the whole broad arsenal. The coach I work with most was a gentleman named Steve Safanki, whose younger brother Larry you'll have.
Larry, sure.
So Steve, we were talking once. He says, "Here's your opponent's line of attack. what do you do? What do you do versus? I try to disrupt it and break it. He goes, okay, why don't you broaden your line? Add more tools, have all these shots possible. Everybody's going gaga over Roger Federer. Yeah, because he learned to play all these shots. So he had a lot of tools at his disposal. So you can suddenly do something like, hand off to the running back while you're running the 2-minute offense.
Best tennis books.
Best tennis books.
You
How
can
many?
name your own if you want, but
I'm not. Modesty prevents me, but I do
sure,
like A Terrible Splendor, a book by the author
sure.
Marshall Fisher about a great match between Don Budge and Gottfried von Kramm. I had lunch with Marshall recently, and I said, yeah, you can't go wrong with Nazis in the plot too. So that's pretty good. Levels of the Game, John McPhee, twin profile of Arthur Ashe and Clark Graebner, written and set against the backdrop of a 1968 U.S. Open semi. Portrait in Motion, Arthur Ashe's diary of the year he turned 30, went to South Africa, and kind of the his awareness of where his life was. At 30 was kind of the witching hour for athletes at one point. Now it's more like 36. But that's a great book. Those are three that come to mind.
Okay.
Handful of Summers. Gordon Forbes is
Gordon Forbes. Okay.
at the amateur years of the 50s and 60s. Those
Yeah.
are a few.
Yeah, I was at the book signing for A Terrible Splendor back in the day. Uh,
Oh, he's
at
from
uh,
Miami.
at
Marshall's
Books
from
and
Miami.
Books in yeah, Books and Books in Coral Gables. But best tennis movies.
Best tennis movies. That's a tough one because
Very.
I wrote about that when Challengers came out. You mean it's got to be tennis as the main theme, or can tennis be allegoric?
Joel, we're lucky to have you here. So if you want to use an allegoric tennis
I
movie,
think
go
Strangers
for it.
on a Train has a neat aspect of tennis to the Alfred Hitchcock movie.
Okay.
It revolves around a tennis player who's not happy in his marriage, and he meets someone on a train, and this guy on the train doesn't like his mother, so they make a deal. The guy's going to kill the wife, and the other guy's supposed to do something. That's kind of, I think, the
Okay.
best tennis in, but pretty thin tennis in the movies. I'm going to give that an insufficient data, as they say in the old
Yeah.
USTA books.
I thought Battle of the Sexes with Steve Carell and Emma Stone was okay. And
I enjoyed it.
at least they used I think Vince Van Patten
Vince Spadea.
was Vince Spade. Oh wow, Vince Van Patten. Vince Spadia. That was a yeah. Vince Spadia was doing some of the tennis sequences, and I know there's another good female college player doing that, so that
Caitlin
helped.
Christian played the Billie Jean King role,
There you
and
go.
it was yeah, I enjoyed that movie. I did I do at least 6 stories on it? I think I wrote six
Okay.
stories about that movie. I also did an event at it. I was living and playing at the club in Brooklyn where Billie Jean often played when she was
Oh,
playing that
okay.
match. So for
Yeah.
sure,
I actually
that's
got a chance to talk to. I did a pod with Rosie Casals, and I asked her a little bit
lovely.
about the Battle of the Sexes and the fact that she was. I don't know if people realize she did the color commentary next to Howard Cosell. So,
And
anyways.
Gene
And
Scott,
Gene
yeah.
Scott, yeah, it's pretty rare air, and she's been played a number of times by different people in the
I'll
movies.
get her thought on how she feels he's played. Yeah, I enjoyed that
Yeah,
movie.
um,
A great tennis movie awaits being made.
agree. Um, all right. Many people, I have to admit, I may have been one of them, thought that with Roger and Rafa and Serena leaving the game, that there would be a decline in popularity. But I would say, I don't know if you agree, but tennis seems to be having quite a moment. There are more tennis books, your books, movies, packed stadiums. Question is why? Why is tennis having such a moment? Why is it resonating so much right now?
And it's had an interesting moment that resurged during the pandemic. Remember, there was a
Sure.
yeah. So it's funny. I joke with a friend. I said, "Wow, all these things tennis since the boom years of the '70s, tennis has spent nearly 40 years wondering what could bring it back. Programs, players, Americans, TV, a tennis channel. Oh, a pandemic." A pandemic. Why didn't we think of that before? A pandemic. I think tennis became a good a social distance sport, and a lot of people enjoy trying. However, I'm not sure what it is that actually triggers popularity as in attendance, the spectator world, viewing, popularity as in participation, because there's a gap between participation and viewership. You know this, and we know this as players. A lot of people, they would always, I was asked 20 people once, what would you rather do? Play a league match or walk across the street for free to watch Andre Agassi play? and every one of them said they'd rather play a match than watch them. So I'm not sure what triggers what we mean by popularity, what we mean by engagement with the sport.
Well, I'm going to close with, I guess, a philosophical question, but really, Joel Drucker, what has tennis meant to you? What does it mean to you?
Well, the great writer William Faulkner had the South. He called it like a postage stamp of the universe. And within that postage stamp, he could explore things. And I guess that's what tennis means to me. So tennis means to me the pure expression of democracy and individualism and a way to really showcase. I mean, that could get a little out of control with the individualism in some cases, but to me, it's a great way to a great mix, as Kim Denise of thought into action, and therefore, if it's thought into action, it's vibrant. It's a dynamic way, and it's very fair. I mean, it's like the team sports. You got to get the coach has got to get you on a team, and you make the team. Tennis is great. It's all you. You're controlling your destiny.
Well, I'm not sure there's a better way to end the Florida Tennis Podcast than that analysis, but Joel Drucker, thank you on behalf of the Florida Tennis Podcast, on behalf of myself, Adam Ross. Thank you from our listeners and viewers. Again, everybody, check out, Jimmy Connors Saved My Life, a great book by Joel Drucker. Check out the latest issue. We'll be coming out with a new one soon that says Nick Saviano and Sloane Stevens on the cover. Check out our Facebook page. Check out our blog on floridatennis.com. Check out Instagram. But most of all, Joel, again, it has been an absolute honor and a pleasure to talk to you tonight. Thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.